We are back for another episode of the Apple Circle podcast, the podcast that breaks down all the latest Apple news, all the leaks, all the rumors you need to know about. But we've got a problem again this week. As what plagued us a little while ago, we're in the Apple off season, meaning that it's the calm before the storm, which is a good thing because there's a lot of good stuff on the horizon, but bad because there's like nothing to talk about. There are no leaks. There are no rumors. The only thing making headlines is like an iOS beta dropping. So we can discuss some little tidbits of news that have come out during the last couple of weeks. But first, we want to make sure we hear from you guys. If you guys have a question, a comment, you're maybe looking at the M2 MacBook Air thinking, should I buy it? Should I not buy it? Should I wait for this? Should I wait for that? Let us know. You can drop that comment at a couple of places. You can call the Apple Circle hotline. That number is 949-354-3508. You can give that a ring. You can call it, you can text it, however you want to communicate. You can just check us out on social media. We're just the Apple Circle everywhere that you do your social media browsing. And also we've got a YouTube channel, which is the Apple Circle Podcast YouTube channel. You can check it out. We've got full clips. We've got video versions there. I'm changing up my background today to something a little bit different. Matt always brings the heat with the best backgrounds. I always, because Matt and I don't see each other, I just hear him in my headphones. I never see anything, and then I'll go on before the podcast is published, and I like look and scrub through, and I see Matt there, and he always has some cool background. Last week he had the Apple TV set up and it looks super cool, and
we're there again today.
I gotta change it up. So I shifted the camera a bit, so I've got a different wall behind me and lighting. You gotta help me with lighting in here because my lighting setup is abysmal. But anyways, Matt, how's your week going? What is new in your neck of the woods?
It's going well. Nothing too much new, like you said. But forget about me. Nothing new here. You just mentioned before we started recording that you got your, what would you say, your second MacBook Air in this config that you actually want. And you still have both, right? So what's going on? Do you like it? Are you selling one? What's going on?
Well, I will say, there's always the rivalry of UPS versus FedEx. And I used to like UPS a lot, but FedEx is doing great. I got this.
Really?
So it's to come Friday. This Friday came Wednesday, and I just moved a couple of months ago. And at this location, for whatever reason, FedEx is always like pre 10 a.m. All the deliveries, I'm like the first stop in the community, I always get this stuff, which is great. So this came at like right as I was going out the door at like 9:45, and I have it in the box there. And I'm in my conundrum of what do I do? This one here behind me, which I was using today, which I still like, this is the upper processor. So it's the 10-core GPU, but it's got a terabyte SSD, but it's only got, or 512, I should say, and only 8 gigs of RAM. And the other one I got is same 512 SSD, but it's the lower end processor. So 8 cores for GPU. I think it's 8-core CPU, 8-core GPU, but 16 gigs of RAM instead of 8. And I'm just like racking my brain. There's a $100 price difference between the two, which is what do I want to keep? Because a part of me is like, I've got this one, it's already set up. And like, usually like if I'm doing stuff, like I'm only in like one app at a time. And for Final Cut, if I'm like, let's say I'm in Final Cut of editing something, is that double the RAM really going to make a difference? Or am I better off with the extra GPU cores? Because we've talked before about how much Final Cut relies on that GPU optimization. Or, thinking about the future here for 2 to 3 years, do I really want to be limited to an 8 gigabyte of RAM computer when I know 16 gigs is going to give me a little bit more wiggle room in the future? So I haven't decided yet on what I'm going to do. I have till Friday because that is when the 2-week return window on this original launch day one is up. So that's when I got to return it. And with that one of them is going to stay, one of them is going to go. So
you're keeping it. You've decided you're keeping it.
I'm going to keep it. No, my general thoughts, I use this every day. Usually what'll happen is, in the morning when I wake up very early, since I have a 7-month-old baby, she'll get her bottle, then I'll be downstairs and I'll work on this. And it's nice to be kind of out of the office. And then during the day, I'm usually at the desk doing stuff in here. But then after 5 o'clock, I shut the door and like any work I need to do, I do on here. So sometimes it's Photoshop thumbnails. Sometimes it's mostly like writing scripts and emails and stuff like that. But I found that for me, the curmudgeon-y person I am, I like having the familiarity and the flexibility of a Mac, of a full-fledged computer over the iPad. So I've decided to keep it. I just don't know which config I'm going to keep. And I've always been like I'm like, there's a bunch of YouTube videos on 8 versus 16. I should watch them. And I haven't yet. So I don't know. I think that as much of a pain as it is to box this up, I'm probably going to keep the 16 one just because I don't think I'm going to need... I'd rather have double the RAM than 2 more GPU cores, I think is my thinking, but we'll see. But I'm going to keep it for sure. I'm a little disappointed on the color. I kind of am regretting this, but I'm going to stick with it because it's something new and I'm kind of over the fingerprint. So we'll see what happens. So that's my, that's where I'm at. Any recommendations? What would you do in this situation? Are you keeping your MacBook Air?
Yeah, I've still got it right here, but I will not be keeping it, which we kind of talked about last week. But basically, for what I'm using this for, and actually I've been using it a lot, I'm kind of in the same situation as you, as if I'm not in the office, and by office I mean my upstairs bedroom, I am not on my regular computer, I'm on this. And normally I'm on the iPad, but since this is out, this is what I'm using right now. And I've been using it a lot, surprisingly. Usually you get you try something new for a few days and then you slowly but surely just fall back into your regular habits. But I haven't been doing that. I've been sticking with this and I like it. I like the form factor. I think it's really good, but it's just not enough value for what I do with it that is matter. Like, for instance, you said, like, we're pretty much doing the same thing. We're answering emails, we're scripting, we're doing that kind of stuff. I'm perfectly okay doing that on the iPad, so that's why the iPad's fine for me. But I still think we got to do this. I don't know when, maybe when the official version is out, or maybe when they announce the next iPad Pro. But you got to get one, try it out with, what do they call it, Stage Manager, because I don't think it's going to convince you to switch to the iPad, but I think you're going to like it more than maybe the videos tell you. It's different, but it gives you kind of the same functionality.
Not only would I be open to trying that, but I think one of my bigger issues lately is I've become a lot less fond of the Magic Keyboard. When it first launched, it was really nice. It's like a decent keyboard and the trackpad was okay. And one of my issues, of course, like besides the hardware, is like the app support. Like a lot of apps just don't support it, which is annoying. But lately, it's felt crammed to me. Maybe it's after, like, I don't know, I've had it for like 2 years. Like the usage of it, like it's sort of gotten a little bit more worn. I'm just not thrilled with it, where with the MacBook Air, obviously being like a full computer, you've got a really good keyboard and a really good trackpad. So maybe an updated version of that, which hasn't been rumored, but I also wouldn't be surprised if there's no rumors on it. They just release a new version. Maybe a more refined version of that would be nice to see, and maybe it'd fix a lot of my issues. But lately, that's been sort of an issue for me. Is I'm not a fan of that Magic Keyboard and trackpad. And the problem is that unless you're willing to bring around another third-party keyboard or your own peripherals, that's like your only choice. You have to use it because it's useless without, just being a touchscreen. So that's sort of been another issue for me, which has sort of, again, moved me to the Air over the iPad Pro.
And you know what? I keep forgetting this, but this is something else. When you do try this, when the new version comes out, you got to get the 12.9 inch. I keep forgetting that you're on the 11, and I think that's really what's killing it for you.
I got to try. I will try. When the new ones come out, I got to just, see what the 2-week window is like and just try it out. Yeah, the 11 inch, I mean, besides like the productivity stuff, for content consumption, it's great. Like this
as
is
a
like
tablet. Yeah,
as a tablet, it's great. I liked it a lot. But trying to like force it to like be a productivity machine for me just like hasn't worked. And again, I think a part of this is just me being like very stuck in my ways. I like having the Mac and knowing all that stuff, but I gotta try it. So yeah, iPad Pro,
kind of.
We'll see.
I was gonna say, kind of going along with the iPads. I was thinking about this because I think a lot of us, iPadOS 16 has definitely boosted it a little bit more in terms of productivity for like what you can do. But like you said, I think there's going to be a lot of people that are just kind of stuck in the Mac ways, which is nothing wrong with that. I mean, in most ways, I'd say it's definitely more efficient to use a Mac. So I think a lot of us are just accepting that that's just what the iPad's going to be. So with that in mind, unless they do something crazy, which I don't think they're going to do, but with that in mind, what do you think is the point of an iPad at this point? Like, okay, we have the digital artists, people, well, maybe not even an artist, but someone who relies on the Apple Pencil. Maybe that's for note taking, maybe that's for art, whatever it may be. But someone who needs the Apple Pencil, so that's one category. You have people who like watch content on it, but I feel like that's not a very big segment because I think most people wouldn't buy the iPad just for that. Maybe I think if they have an iPad, they would use it for that, but I don't know if they would buy an iPad for that. Maybe I'm wrong, but that's kind of what I'm thinking. And then you have the people who are going to do work on it, which I think for like school age people, that's a good option for a lot of them. But when you get to kind of our level in terms of like specialized production and stuff like that, it's not the best. So what is the iPad for? Like, what am I missing here? And more importantly, what am I going to update? Well, why would I update at this point?
First off,
yeah, go ahead.
Well, first off, Apple gives no compelling reason to upgrade, especially like they keep putting this great silicon inside, but there's like no good use. Okay, maybe Stage Manager, maybe, but there's no compelling reason. And that's a good question. That's always sort of been the crux of the iPad is like, who is this for? For me, a couple of specific groups. One is, I think there's a lot of people, older people, who want to have a blown up iPhone experience, and for that the iPad's perfect. I don't have to worry about the viruses or the monotony or the technicalities of a computer. For email, web surfing, Facebook, Candy Crush, an iPad in that sense is really, really good. My parents love their iPads. I think my grandma has an iPad. Like so many people I think about in my life who don't need the complexity of a computer, the iPad's still really good for. Until you need a computer, then it's really annoying. But for most people, that's really nice. I also feel like there is a group of people, maybe this is a younger generation up and coming, that they don't need a computer. I think that we're still stuck in the mindset, or at least I know I am a lot of the time, where it's like, I need a computer to do this or that, where you probably don't have to. And if you weren't trained in a specific way, then an iPad is probably fine. But where the iPad becomes difficult to justify is when it's like an additional device and something you already have. Like for us, we've got computers, we've got multiple computers, we've got iPhones, we maybe even have other Mac laptops. Where does the iPad fit into that realm? I think for a lot of people, it's a luxury, which is why it makes sense for the Apple to focus on things like the screen and the speaker and stuff like that. And I get the cry for pro apps, and I've been one that's complained about it, but maybe we're just too niche. And there are like these niche groups of people who use the iPad in like specific ways, and like, oh, I'm using it on a film set, I'm using it as in reference and stuff like that. But maybe that's like a 2% of the iPad population, where 98% is doing content consumption. So in my mind, it's still, the iPad is still a content consumption device, though there are different ways to do it. That's the easiest way to justify, because really it's like you either like there's two types of people I've seen. You're either all in on the iPad and you use it for everything and you've transformed your life around this thing, or it's like a nice secondary thing to have that isn't going to make or break your life.
Yeah, I pretty much agree with that. I guess that just still leaves the question, okay, so all of that I think makes sense, but I need at max an iPad Air for that. Like, what do I need a mini LED display? Like you said, it's a luxury. And do I really need it? Not for what I'm doing with it, not for what most people are doing with it. Like, say you are doing some kind of specialty, like you're doing some kind of, you have it on a film set or something and you're going through your shot list with it. Well, you definitely don't need an iPad Pro for that, right? So that's where it gets confusing, is like, what is the point? Because you have I guess maybe it's just that they can do it, so might as well, because some people are gonna like it. Like, I have one, so obviously I'm one to talk here. I have the iPad Pro, so they got me somehow.
It seems to me like still, like, especially with the market angle of the screen, it's all about content consumption. And yes, I would make the assumption that a pro device like that should be able to do more pro things, which the iPad Pro really doesn't do anything pro, or at least significantly better than like an Air or a Mini. If you think about it, I mean, okay, so it's got what, Thunderbolt instead of like regular USB-C. It's got a better screen. It's got a LiDAR, which is still TBD. The usefulness of that, I still have not found a very useful application for that. There's not a whole lot of compelling reasons to jump iPad Pro, so maybe the iPad Air is better in a lot of ways. I was talking to our podcast producer / editor, Alec, about this, and he's very much in the Android world, but he was saying that he wants to buy an iPad Pro, and his thing was, I want to buy a really nice tablet that does tablet stuff, but like has a really great screen. Like if you're looking for just like pure content consumption, the iPad Pro has a really nice screen. It's going to be great. But again, that price is hard to justify. And it's like, what really makes the iPad Pro besides the screen? I don't really know, because the usefulness of that M1 chip is still yet to be seen. I've not seen a compelling reason to have that over an Air, which I guess the Air has an M1 too. So I don't know. The iPad lineup is kind of confusing these days.
Yeah, and then, okay, I now own the 12.9-inch iPad Pro with the mini LED display, with the great speakers, all the pro stuff. Next year, or I guess this year, in like 2 months, why am I going to buy the M2 iPad Pro, or whatever they end up doing with it? Why in 2 years am I going to do it? Like, what are they going to do differently? I don't know. And will I buy it? Probably, because I'm a sucker, but mainly just because this is our job. But in the real world, why would I need to upgrade? And I guess it would just be once that iPad doesn't work anymore, then I would upgrade. I think that's what most people do with their iPads. I know back in the day, I'm sure this is still the case, but I remember back in the day, like people were on iPad 2s forever. Like they would not give those things up. And they worked because there's just not much that you do on an iPad. So it just kind of worked forever.
I feel like the upgrade cycle is a lot less prominent, or maybe just for us than like the iPhone. Because the iPhone is like, oh, every year it's like, this is like, you got to get the new one. But with the iPad, it's like, I still have the 2020 refresh. Ooh, I'm hitting the MacBook Air. Where's my iPad? It's in the backpack. A12Z. So it's still, the older processor, but it still works well for everything I need to do, which is mainly just watching stuff. And the design, I mean, that maybe Apple did so good back in, was it 2018 when they redesigned it? That redesign was so good that there has not been a compelling reason for money to upgrade. Or really the problem is that there has really not been a compelling reason to upgrade. There has not been a big feature or big enough. It's like, for me, it's like there's been, well, I guess there's only been one refresh since this one, when they switched to M1, and I saw no reason to upgrade. And even like now, it's like they're going to do the M2, and maybe the screen will get a little bit better in some way, and maybe they'll do MagSafe, but still, this one's working just fine for me, so there's really not a reason for me to spend the money to upgrade, because what am I going to ultimately get from that?
Yeah, and I guess because I always, every time I bring up this argument, especially online, I see people respond, and it's just like, well, it's like say like a car company like BMW or whatever. They have the 2 series, they have the 3 series, they have the 4 series, they have the 5 series, 7, 8. They literally have every series you could think of. And it's just, enter where you can enter. And that's fine. I get that. That makes sense for the iPad. Like, if you want to spend all the money, you got the iPad Pro. If you want the least amount, you can buy the regular iPad. That makes sense. But it's like, with the iPad in particular, like the iPhone, you can tell that we're just at peak iPhone. There's only so much they can do before we get to, like, the next generation, whatever that ends up being. Maybe folding phones, something like that. Like, you could see that they're on that path. And same with the Macs. They've just done a really big refresh with it and really, tried. I feel like I don't feel that with the iPad. I feel like they're just, maybe because they did so good in 2018, they feel like they're just going to ride it out until they're forced to do something else. I don't know. Because like the software stuff, like you said, it works on older products. I mean, does Stage Manager really only work on M1? Probably not, because the reason that they gave for it working on M1 only kind of was what's the word, like the iPad Air base model, the 64 gig, apparently doesn't have enough storage to do the, what do they call that,
virtual memory swap?
Yeah, the virtual memory swap. That was the reason they gave for it being on the M1 only, but the base model 64 gig iPad Air doesn't support virtual memory swap, so that doesn't, whatever the reason is, it doesn't really make sense. So like, is that the reason? I don't know. It just seems like it seems like they're resting on their laurels with the iPad, but then on the flip side of it, the iPad is still just so good. It's by far the best tablet. Like, if you want a tablet, buy the iPad, any iPad. Like, if you buy the base model iPad all the way up to the 12.9-inch iPad Pro, you're gonna get a great product. But it's just like, it's a feeling I get when I think about the iPad where I just am not excited about it at all. When I feel like I could be.
This sort of nicely segues us into another topic, which I think kind of branches into this. And it's a video I just recorded for Apple Circle, which is kind of a two-parter. One is that, now with Johnny Ive officially stepping away from Apple in any official capacity with his consulting firm, there's a lot of questions. Really, it's a very interesting take. We can talk about it on whether Apple is better with Johnny Ive gone or not. But also, there's the understanding of, Tim Cook's new leadership, kind of his continued leadership, not only I think caused the fall of Johnny Ive, but also has changed Apple in a lot of ways. And we've talked about this before, but there's a lot of concern, I think rightfully so, that Apple is involved in so many different things that they're missing out on some of their main products and ways to improve it. And in some cases, some lines have gotten better than ever. I think the Mac line is better than it's ever been before. But when you look at the iPad Pro, like we were just talking about, I feel like there's some issues there, whether that's a resources issue, I don't know what it is, but I pulled the stats. Let me see if I can pull this up, because I had a line for the Apple Circle video on some of the stuff. Let me see if I can pull it up really quickly here live. It was, if I can go to the right script, I just wanted to do something with numbers, so I did this. Apple has got, so I made the point here, there are 4 different iPad models. There's the Air, the Mini, the base one, and the Pro. There's 5 different iPhones, the SE, then the 4 main ones. There's 7 different Mac models. And then there's Arcade, there's News Plus, Fitness Plus, TV Plus, Apple Credit Card, AirPods, AirPods Pro, AirPods Max, 2nd Gen, 3rd Gen, Apple TV 4K, Apple Watch Series 3, 4. It's like, I understand there are like 2 things here. One is Tim Cook is trying to maximize his profits by giving people different options to suit their lifestyle and their budget, which is a great thing. I mean, I think that that's making things more accessible for everybody. But also, Apple is involved in so many different things that maybe some of their products are suffering because they're not getting the attention they deserve.
Yeah, that's kind of always the worry because, I mean, this is a famous story, but back in the 90s and 97 when Steve Jobs came back, I mean, that was the issue then. Apple was doing so many things and they all pretty much sucked. And so, you know, famously, Steve Jobs came back. He cut pretty much every product line and they did the, what do they call it? Like, I think there was a specific name for it, but it was basically the 4 squares. There was a pro desktop and laptop, and there was a consumer desktop and laptop, and that's all they did. So they had the iMac, then they had, what did they call it? It wasn't the Mac Pro, but it was like the Power
Mac?
G5 or whatever.
Power
Mac, that's what it was. Then they had the iBook and the what's the professional one before the MacBook Pro?
PowerBook. Yep.
Yeah. So that's what they had. That's all they worked on. And I mean, it's hard to argue that strategy didn't work because the products, they could focus on what they were actually going to sell. They focused on it and the products were excellent. I mean, there's no doubt if you look at what they were selling in like, say, 96 and then look at what they were selling after the iMac G3 and the iBook, the 1st gen came out, that those were radically different products and Apple was thinking about it. They intentionally chose to make those products different and unique and a new direction for the company. And I mean, you could still see that DNA today in what we have, but I guess the difference today is that instead of Apple having a million products that all are mediocre, they have a million products that are all actually really good. So it's like, is it a problem? Is it? I don't know, but I could see it slipping back very quickly with a few wrong steps.
It's tough because I understand why Apple does this, because in a way in order to be viable and to survive and have this, you know, to please the shareholders, they have to bring in money. And obviously we have a economy, and especially in the tech space, it's shifting to subscriptions and these recurring payments. And that's what Apple has to do. And with iPhone sales slumping, because we had, you know, year after year iPhone sales better than ever, then obviously you hit this peak where everybody's got iPhones. So they've got to look at other product categories. That I understand. But there are still some that are critical of like, does Apple really need to be in the finance world with the Apple credit card and the buy now, pay later? You know, is Apple Arcade really providing any value, which I still haven't heard any. I haven't heard much good about News Plus or Arcade. I still am so curious to see how those are actually doing behind the scenes. Apple TV Plus, we've talked about before, has sort of a mixed track record, but it's getting better. Apple's got a lot of irons in the fire, which is a good thing. And like you said, I wouldn't say there's anything bad particularly. Like there's like not one bad thing. It's just that maybe they're like doing enough to keep everything afloat, but nothing is excelling as much as it could. I wonder if Apple like took away all their subscription services and there wasn't, you know, 50 million different models of different things, if they could focus in on the iPhone and maybe they just made 2 models, would we have a better iPhone because of that? I don't know. And maybe iPhone and even Apple wouldn't be as successful if they did that, but just something to sort of think about, I guess.
Yeah, that's kind of what I'm thinking. Like if, let's just say they had the iPad, they had like 2 models of the iPad, they had 2 models of the iPhone. So instead of the iPhone team working on, you know, the SE, the 13, the 14, probably the 15 as well, they would all be focused on 2 models. So, or I guess maybe, you know, half of them would be focused on the next 2, and then half of that team would be focused on the 2 after that. So like the 15, for instance. So yeah, if they had all that mind power on 2 phones instead of like 8 phones, I can only imagine that it would be better, right? Like, because I guess we always hear these stories about how there's these cool ideas that are always like floating around. Like for instance, last year it was the GPS, or sorry, not the GPS, the satellite communications that was going to be built into the iPhone, supposedly, so that if you're off grid. By the way, speaking of that feature, I just thought of this. I think that is actually coming to the 14, and here's my reasoning. Because in the iOS 16 beta, if you don't have Signal, which I've been without Signal for a lot of the past month, just because I've been traveling and stuff, instead of saying no service, it actually says SOS. So the idea is that you would actually have a way to reach emergency contacts. But if I have no signal, like there's no service, how am I going to do that? I think it's coming. That's my little
no, there's a little tidbit I haven't heard before. So there you go, Apple Circle podcast exclusive.
Yeah, so that's a little tangent there, but I just wanted to get that out. But yeah, so if they were working on or what I was saying is, we got rumors for that kind of feature, and then it's like, well, it just didn't make it this year, or we didn't have enough supplies, or like, oh, it'll be in the next phone. But it's like, if they were focusing everything on this phone, maybe it would be able to be possible. More minds, more resources. Maybe it's possible. I don't know. Or maybe it's not. Maybe Apple is doing everything perfectly right, and this is just how it has to be. But I don't know.
Or maybe it's just, if they found out like this is like the gear they can be at to make most people happy. So they're making pretty good stuff. They're making a ton of money. Like, this is where it needs to be, because I guess there's an argument to be made that, hey, we're just going to focus on these two higher end phones. You're going to be at least $1,000, which is great. But then you're segmenting a lot of people off from Apple, and Apple wouldn't be the company it was because there wouldn't be as many customers because they're so expensive. I get that too. So it's hard to shift the blame entirely on that. Another sort of interesting thing, though, is the departure of Johnny Ive. And what's funny about this is that, when this was first announced back in 2019, a lot of people were really nervous about what a post-Johnny Ive Apple would look like. This is a guy who worked hand in hand with Steve Jobs to make some of the most defining products of all time, not only in the tech space, but like in the world. iPhone, iPad, Mac, Apple Watch, AirPods, iPod. So many great things came from, Johnny Ive designs. And there was a little worry about what Apple would be like without him. I feel like now, 3 years later in 2022, it almost like it's a blip on the radar, and people are like, oh, that's sad to see. It's a little bit of an end of era, but no one's really concerned because Apple seems to be just fine without him.
Yeah, not only that, but like excelling. Because, when you were talking about that, I was thinking like, we're complaining about something that's not really here yet, right? Like the possibility that they're making too many things that aren't good enough. And I guess the reason that's a worry is because when Johnny Ive was here, they definitely were going down that path. They didn't have quite as many products as they do now, but the products were suffering in a way. And I guess you could say that's because of Johnny Ive. Famously, we moved from a bunch of ports to no ports with a touch bar. We also had one USB-C with no MagSafe in the 12-inch MacBook so that we can have the thinnest computer possible, which in today's world, like, I'd actually like to see that come back. But back then, that did not need to come out at that point. And it's, for a lot of people, seemed like a failure of a product. And just, the general trope that Apple is focused on making things thinner and lighter and form over function, that was happening, and people were feeling it, especially in the Mac line. But now that Johnny has gone, I mean, they turned the corner on that. So I guess the worry is, it's possible that they will go down that path again, even though they're not necessarily doing it right now. But yeah, they really turned it around. The Mac line right now is really killing it. The iPhones are killing it. Whether or not they're boring, I mean, that's up to you. But in terms of what they are, you can't say that what Apple has released in the last year is bad. I think that's what you can say.
It's interesting too, because we on the outside do not know how deep the Johnny Ive influence runs, and also how long his timeline has been. Because, so he announced his official departure back in 2019, and there's a lot of speculation that like he was kind of mostly checked out before then. But Apple worked so far ahead that we probably still have a lot of Johnny Ive DNA in the stuff we see now. I wouldn't be surprised if the 14 still had the Johnny Ive seal of approval, and I don't know how long it's going to be until we see some designs we probably won't know that were completely independent of Johnny Ive influence. What's also interesting too is that it's like Apple doesn't even have to reinvent the wheel. It's almost like the functionality will trump everything else and people will be happy. Like the Mac Studio is literally like 2.5 Mac Minis stacked on top of each other. It's like a giant
actually
aluminum
kinda ugly.
box. It is kind of ugly. It's just like this big box, but it's powerful. It's got a bunch of ports, and people are happy with it, which is crazy. And maybe there is a case to be made that Apple needs to focus their design attention a little bit more on like some of the consumer stuff and a little less on the pro stuff, since the pros want that functionality. It's like, the Mac Studio is like nothing to really look at, but that's okay. But also, just because they put a little less emphasis on form and a little more on function doesn't mean things are bad. Like the MacBook Pro, it's not a bad looking computer at all. Maybe it's a little bit more boring. It's sort of just a metal, or I guess aluminum box, but still looks good. But man, having those full size ports and having a bigger battery and all that stuff, it's really, really nice. And I think that Apple's starting to realize that there's a balance there they've got to have and achieve, and they can tip the scale a little bit more to functionality and a little less on form, still keep the Apple design language, but it doesn't need to be what it was. They don't need to focus on making the thinner and the lighter thing. They don't need to make it, emphasize the design in that way. Just make it look good and pack some functionality in there, and people are going to be happy.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And I guess, kind of going along with that, I guess you could say the main thing to do if you are worried about the direction Apple's going, or you're concerned, or you just have feedback, is to actually be vocal about it. Because I think there's an argument to be made that if nobody was up in arms about the Mac Pro never getting an update, or the MacBook Pro, the 2016 model, I guess 2015, 2016, whatever, with the original one with the touch bar, if no one was complaining about that computer, even if it wasn't very good, and if everyone was just kind of meh, hey, yeah, it's fine, this is just what Apple makes, then there's a good argument that they would still very much be down that path right now. But I mean, it's just easiest to see with the Mac line, because that was such a direct shift. Is even Apple themselves, basically came out and talked to journalists when they did that meeting with the Mac Pro, and they basically admitted in so many words that they messed up and that they know it and they're working on something to fix it. And now we have those computers. There's been some, I'm holding up the MacBook Air right now. There's been some complaints about the MacBook Air, and that, it's not the best computer that it could be. But that aside, it's still an excellent computer for the vast majority of things. The MacBook Pro, like you said, is excellent. Same with the Studio. Even the iMac, the 24-inch iMac, is like great. So it's like that shows what the consumer feedback really does, because there's an argument that if we were just kind of complacent, we would not be anywhere near where we are today.
That's a really good point, and one that I really didn't think about, because there's oftentimes, everyone's so polarized. You complain about anything, oh, you're an Apple hater, oh, you're an Apple fanboy, and I think it's really important to draw that line, and there is a way to do both things. There is a way to express your enthusiasm about Apple, but not defend every little thing they do, and also there's a way to criticize Apple and give constructive feedback without slamming them into the ground as the worst thing ever. And I think we try to do a good job of that on this, show, and all our sort of the John Render channel. John does a great job with that. We try to do it on the Apple Circle, sort of all that stuff. We try to give very fair and balanced, presentations. And I guess we didn't even talk about John just put out his video about how the insights in Apple PR, which is fun. But I just think that that's a really good point to make. And I think you said it really well. If there wasn't that discourse and no one said anything, Apple probably would just keep doing things. And I think that, people are always so quick to judge you one way or the other. Oh, you're going to complain about this, complain about that. What are you talking about? But it's important because it's going to make things better. If no one says anything, it's not going to change. So that's a very good point to make. And I see both sides. There's the avid Apple defenders. At all costs, Apple will never do wrong. And also there's like the Apple's doing everything wrong. But there's somewhere in the middle is a way to sort of help Apple better their craft and make better products for everyone.
Yeah, and I'm trying to think of like examples today, and I haven't looked into this too deeply. Maybe you have, so maybe you can fill in the gaps here. But basically, the complaints with this MacBook Air is that the M2 chip is clearly not a second generation of the M1. Like, I think we know that it's like a M1.5, right? And that there is some thermal issues here. And I think a lot of people are disappointed, not because the computer is bad, but because the leap from Intel to M1 was so huge. And the leap from M1 to M1 Pro, M1 Max, and Ultra was so huge that we were expecting maybe not that big of a jump, but more than what we got with the M2. And I wouldn't be surprised if with, I guess, the M3 or whatever that is, whatever they end up doing with the next generation, either they wait between cycles before they can actually do an M2, because I guess the rumor was that this M1.5, quote unquote, that we got isn't the M2, and that we will get the M2 at some point, and it was like a supply thing, and they just couldn't get it out the way they wanted to, so they did this. If that's the case, I could see them in the future not doing that and just waiting for it to be ready. And if that means it takes 18 months, 2 years, then maybe that's just what it is. But, you know, do you see what I'm saying? Like, I think there's something to be said in, like, even today's argumentation that, like, maybe Apple was trying to, you know, they're figuring it out. So our feedback is always going to help.
Well, there's also an issue too. I think a very fair criticism that I've seen the comparison how the MacBook Air, the base model, is now more expensive than the previous generation, but it's got a slower SSD inside. And I think that is a very fair characterization, and I don't think that the newer generation should be worse in some areas. And also, I think that Apple, they've never been good with their base models, and in a lot of ways the base models are okay, but in some, like I think 8 gigs of RAM is okay, but 256 gigs of storage, putting the slower SSD speed aside, 256 base is kind of crazy. It's like we've had that issue with the iPhone and the iPad for years and years. Apple is very stingy with their base configuration offering. So putting the slower SSD aside, which I think is still stupid why Apple would do that, whether that's a big deal to you or not, you can decide. But still, I don't think that a newer product should have a deficiency in that regard. It seems weird. But also, why not do 512? Why 256? Because once you put the OS on there, you're getting like less than, you know, you're getting what, 220, 215, whatever gigabytes. That seems sort of crazy to me. But also, you know, now with it being more expensive, I think there's a very fair case to be made that the base model M2 is not as great of a value proposition as the M1 MacBook Air was, and that the MacBook Air is still a great machine, but you've got to spec it out a little bit more and pay a little bit more to get that, and the base model isn't as good of a value as other base model Apple computers have been, if that sort of makes sense.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And I guess the question is this us projecting onto Apple, or is this Apple compromising in some way, and this is just what we get? And I guess we don't know the answer to that. I don't know if we'll ever know the answer to that. I will say, kind of in relation to that, I have a little theory. I'm going to make a full video on this on my personal channel. This is kind of this is going to be the review video for the M1 or M2 MacBook Air. But I've got this theory, and I've talked about this before on the show back when we had rumors about this machine. But the more I use this, am convinced that the M2 MacBook Air that we got was not supposed to be a MacBook Air, and instead was supposed to be a MacBook type device. And there's a few reasons for that. First, just like kind of as an observation, MacBook Air is not written on this computer at all anywhere. So that kind of tells me maybe there was some back and forth about what this computer would be named, just for a marketing perspective. 2, it has the exact same design as the MacBook Pro. It's just thinner. Interesting. It went away from the wedge shape for the first time ever. And 3, I guess the biggest reason is that this computer is not at all what I would consider air or lightweight or super portable. Yes, it is thin. Yes, it's not that heavy. But I think we both remarked this when we first picked it up, is that it was actually way heavier than we were expecting it to be. It did not feel remarkable in any way, shape, or form. And while I'm not the first person to bring this up, this is something I keep thinking about. When you compare it to the 12-inch MacBook that we got a few years ago, that is what we were expecting from a next generation Air product. Something that is wow in terms of form and function. And honestly, I don't even see why they couldn't put a M2 chip into the 12-inch MacBook from a few years ago. Do you see what I'm saying here? Like, there's something here that's telling me that this was not the original plan, at the very least.
You know, in the vein of Apple doing too much stuff and having 7 different Mac models, do you think that they should just kill the Air name and just, we talked about this before, MacBook, MacBook Pro, and if the rumors are true, you'd have 2 sizes. So there's a 13-inch MacBook and a 15-inch MacBook, because there is a rumor that they're going to make a 15-inch Air. 13, 15 MacBook, there's a Pro at 2 sizes. Do you think that it's kind of happened on the iPad, the names have gotten a little convoluted and a little confusing because, okay, I got the iPad, I got the iPad Air, I got the iPad Pro, I got the iPad Mini. Maybe they just need to simplify things and this should just be MacBook and MacBook Pro. That makes a lot of sense and I think would be honestly a good marketing angle because I feel like it's a little confusing because like you said, what's funny is put this Air, the new one next to the old Air, they look like two completely different lines. And also, like you said, this is not, it's a nice computer, but in my mind, it is more of a basic Mac and more streamlined Mac than it is an Air lightweight Mac because this is a lighter computer, but it's not the thin and lightweight Air that you think about with a MacBook Air. Maybe it's because it doesn't have that tapered design, but I get what you're saying for sure, and I follow you there. And it's also weird, like there's no MacBook, nothing on here at all.
Yeah, I get the feeling, I don't know what the full story is, but this is not the computer that they wanted to be this computer, if that makes sense. Whether that means the name was going to be different, whether that means they had supply constraints, so they just had to ship this. Something's off. I don't know exactly what it is, but something's off. And like you said, the rest of the line is just confusing. We have the MacBook Pro M2, which absolutely makes no sense. We have the M1 MacBook Air, which they're still selling, which, like you said, as we get into this more and more, as we have more experience with the M2 MacBook Air, even I have to agree that is probably the better computer to buy for most people. Like, I care about the form factor, I care about the screen, I care about all that stuff, but the more I think about it, the more it just doesn't make sense to spend the more money over it. But if the MacBook Air was kind of relegated to the, I guess, cheaper budget Mac, that was the base model. This was a MacBook, and like you said, two sizes, which is the rumor, and then we have the MacBook Pro. That makes perfect sense, but right now it's a mess. I don't understand. I just don't get it, and I don't know.
The naming scheme has always been a problem, and I feel like
I just don't know why
to simplify it. I don't know why.
What is the reason? Yeah, because it's like, are any of us going to be super confused or super mad if, like, even if they called the MacBook Pro M2, if they just called it the MacBook, it would make it make more sense.
What's also funny too is I wonder if people even care about
the
thinness and lightness because this is the same argument for the iPhone SE. Is the iPhone SE successful because it is a smaller screen phone or because it's cheap? Spoiler alert, probably because it's cheap.
For sure. Yeah,
so
definitely.
for the MacBook Air, back in 2008, it was very impressive to slide that thing out of a manila envelope and show how thin and light it is. But I feel like these days, it's thin and light enough as long as the battery's good and it's got a good price point. That's what people care about. So who even needs the Air name anymore? Who do we have to prove? And especially, with this Johnny Ive departure, the thinness and the lightness, who cares about that? Simplify the lineup, call it what it is, and you can make it slim and light, and that's fine and that's good, but I don't think that the Air name is something that needs to be touted anymore. I don't think it carries at all the significance that it did. In my mind, Air just equals cheaper and more affordable and stripped down from the Pro.
Right, and that's kind of how it is on the iPad too. The iPad Air right now is nothing. It's just it's just the non-Pro iPad Pro. So it's like, is that what they want Air to mean? Because the reason why I think the Air name should stick around is if they made a MacBook Air that was the 12-inch MacBook, but a updated 2022 version of it, then that would be impressive. Like, imagine you get the M2 power in that tiny computer. It's super lightweight. It literally fits in my wife's purse. It's a tiny computer that still has a full-size keyboard, still has a great screen, but is really compact and lightweight, and it lives up to that Air name. That makes sense. But what it is now just seems like like the budget computer. There's got to be a reason why they do these weird names, but I just want to know what it is because it doesn't make any sense from the outside.
Here's the problem with the MacBook, the future MacBook. That MacBook was 2015 when it came out, right? It was 7 years ago, so a different era of what it was. Now, if the rumors are true and the iPad Pro gets M2 and that has a 12.9-inch display, is there room for both, or do you think Apple wants to push the thin and lightweight Mac? Basically, their argument is if you want a thin and lightweight Mac at this 12-inch screen size that you can take around with you with an M2, you should just be buying an iPad Pro instead. Is there room for both?
Well, yes. Apple has shown in the last few years that they clearly don't care. I mean, this is all you need to know. We have the M2 MacBook Air and the M2 MacBook Pro, and they exist at the same time. So yes, there's room in the line to do that. I guess the question is, does Apple want you to do that? And I think they do want you to switch over to the iPad if at all possible. For whatever reason, I don't know. I go back and forth on whether Apple actually wants you to do that, because one year it seems like they're really pushing the iPad, and then the next year it seems like they don't care about the iPad, and it goes back and forth. So I really don't know. But in terms of, is there room? Absolutely, there's room, and I think it's definitely possible. I just don't know. I don't know if it's. I just don't know what Apple's thinking. I want to know what they're thinking, and it's from the outside, it's very confusing.
It's just funny how, just like we said before, with the attention on different things, there's a lot of different sway in products. The Mac line has no attention and it's dwindling. Then they pour all their attention into it, it gets way better. But then the iPad line doesn't make any sense. It's almost like they're not shifting their gears enough between different things, and the emphasis makes things a little confusing. So it's like, now the Mac is good, but what's happening with the iPad? I'd love to know what the master plan is. And like you said, it's funny how they used to push the iPad and push the iPad. And then it seems like they stopped doing that altogether. And, the iPad exists, but look how great the Mac is. It's just, there's a hypocrisy there as well with USB-C and Touch ID. It's like, on the iPhone, Face ID, and on the iPad, it's the best thing ever. But on the Mac, Touch ID is far superior. It's just, they like to pick and choose their priorities depending on the situation, which when you look at two products side by side, you see a lot of double standards there that exist.
Yeah, and I guess, I keep coming back to, like, we're giving a lot of criticism here, which, one, I think is good, but two, it's like, at the end of the day, these products are actually still really good, but it's like, in certain ways, you can just see how obvious it is that at the very least, maybe it wouldn't be necessarily better, but at the very least, it would be more clear and not hypocritical. Hypocritical? Is that a word?
Hypocritical.
Hypocritical. I don't know. I'm trying to be like philosophical or something now. Hypocritical is the word I meant. You could see easy ways where they could fix all those issues, and I just don't know why they don't do it. And I think there's probably two answers to that. One is that this is a huge company, so whether Apple wants to pride themselves as not having this issue or not, at a certain point when you get that big, things are just going to slip through the cracks, and different departments are going to miss talking to each other. I think it's inevitable for a company the size of Apple. So that's one thing. And on the other side, I think there is definitely a psychological side to this, where Apple has done the research and tested what does best. And maybe they have figured out that in people's minds, Air means cheap. So they're going to keep the Air around as the more affordable computer, or the more affordable iPad. I think there's two sides of that, but it's just, I would like to know what it is. I hope someone writes a book one day.
It's funny because I was actually at the Apple Store over the weekend. I was talking about how I was getting my parents new phones, and I was there.
Oh, yeah.
And funny enough, as I look over, I'm standing there at the table. They're doing the iPhone transaction and stuff. And there's a guy on the other opposite end of the table who is buying a computer. And I just happened to sneak a look at what it is. Drum roll, please. MacBook Pro. I'm going to go, why?
M2.
Why? I'm assuming so. And it looked like the base. And someone else had tweeted as well in someone tweeted, I forgot who it was, but they were at a store and someone was deciding between the two, and they're like, well, I'm going to go with this one because Pro means better, right? And I think that is the fallacy, and that's the trap, exactly what Apple wants, and people are buying these things. So obviously Apple knows what people will buy, and there's a reason that laptop sticks around, because Apple said it's the second best selling laptop, so okay. And not that that's a good thing. I still think there's a ton of things Apple is selling that they shouldn't sell. Still, I think it's crazy that they're selling the Series 3 Apple Watch, even though they know full well it's publicly acknowledged that it's not going to be supported and people are still buying it. Boggles my mind.
Because theoretically, on the day they announce the new watch and the new watch OS, the day it becomes public is also the day they will stop selling the Series 3 theoretically. So, literally, people that day would have bought that watch, and it's already not working.
For full price,
it's gonna work,
too.
But you know
whatever, is it $200, whatever it is? I mean, I could not...
It's too expensive, whatever it is.
In good conscience, whatever it is.
Conscience.
I got to enunciate there. I can't be an Apple employee and sell this watch. It's like... it's like with the iPhone 13, the iPhone 14, it's all very hush-hush. It's coming, but, whatever. People need to get a phone, do what you got to do. But to know that, hey, I'm going to sell you this watch, and literally there's time ticking down until we already have publicly said this is going to be obsolete. You shouldn't buy this. You're still selling it. Just that's crazy. And like the Apple TV HD, $150 for I think I got to fact check this, but I think it's a 10-year-old chip. It's like an A8.
Something
it just
like that,
seems crazy to me that they still sell that and people still buy it, which it's just insane. Boggles my mind.
Yeah, it's the mysteries of Apple. I guess that's what gives us things to talk about on the off weeks, because there's a lot of things that are just questions. And I think that's why I actually like Apple, is because there's a lot of those questions. Like I don't really have those questions with like, yeah, I don't really have those questions with like Google or Microsoft very much. And I guess it's because they're not as product focused, but it's just something that fascinates me. I want to know the answers. I want to try to figure it out. But hey, that's why we have a podcast to discuss it. Anything else? I think we've exhausted that topic.
Yeah, I don't think so. Again, it's been kind of a slow news weekend. Unfortunately, August isn't much better in the Apple realm. I mean, we're probably going to get some
pictures or something.
Confirmation iPhone 14 stuff. I mean, we're like inching closer and closer to the event. September, by the way, start saving now because it's going to be expensive. You've got iPhone 14. Yeah. You've got AirPods Pro 2, hopefully. You've got Apple Watch Series 8. I'm ready for the Pro. I can't wait. Even though I guess we could say very briefly, it's now basically confirmed that like Mark Gurman is very interesting. There's going to be a design change, but it's not going to be flat edges and it's like not going to be crazy, but it's going to be different than what we've seen. I don't know what in the world it's going to look like, but it's probably going to be like $1,000. It's going to be insane. But all I have to say, start saving now because August is going to be a slump. September is going to be very exciting and lots of new stuff coming and lots of expensive stuff coming because it seems like price increases are coming. And if you want AirPods Pro 2 and you want iPhone 14, you want the Apple Watch, that's a couple $1,000 you're going to have to spend. Or you can do the buy now, pay later, and Apple will gladly, take you on payments. But a lot of stuff in the works. So just keep that in mind.
Yep. No, there's a lot of stuff coming up. It's going to be exciting. Who would have thought that in the fall, the most exciting thing right now would be the Apple Watch Pro or whatever they end up calling it. But that's kind of the world we live in right now. But yeah, I think that's it for this episode. I don't have the phone number in front of me, so can you pull us out? I don't have a table in front of me.
Yes, I will. 949-354-3508. Give us a call, text the Apple Circle hotline. We want to include you guys more, so if you got a voicemail, you got a question, we could honestly use some help right now with the content because it's a little slow in the news cycle, so let us know. But I always just kind of like to talk about this stuff and, you made a great point, Matt. The discourse is important. The feedback is important. We love Apple, but I think it's important to give some criticism where criticism's due so things can get better for everyone. I think, honestly, I like to think almost like I'm sticking up for the little guy because in a lot of ways, there's so many areas of things that I know nothing about. Like, I feel like if I took my car to a mechanic, that's so out of my realm that I would like an advocate on my side, and I'd like to think of ourselves as advocates in the Apple world, helping Apple make change and telling people how to best maximize their dollar. And we're doing the good, the people's good here on this show. So anyways, give us a ring or a text on that number. Also, as well, we're on YouTube. You can check out our Apple Circle Podcast YouTube channel. We have full episodes there as well as clips you can check out. And also social media. Follow us on Twitter. All our info is down below in the description wherever you listen or watch this podcast. As always, thank you guys so much for watching, listening. We'll see you right back here next week on another episode of the Apple Circle Podcast.